Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Even If Project Podcast. I'm Christina, and I'm so excited you guys are here with me today. I've got my water today. It's actually pretty late. I'm recording this one late today because I don't know, life has just been lifing this week, I guess. Between toddler stuff and my school, I've been kind of fast tracked because I switched majors recently. So I'm trying to get caught up with everything and get this. I have one class left before the end of the semester, which is at the end of February. So I've been really busy trying to get that done. So with the toddler stuff and doing that and trying to get back into my fitness stuff and nutrition and my naturopath diet and everything like that, it's just been crazy. So I am procrastinating on recording this episode, so this is why it's being recorded late. I usually record them on Fridays, and it's Sunday today, so I am way behind. But instead of my coffee, I've got my water today, my Bible open, and today we're going to be moving on to John 12. This passage is quiet, but it shows us something very important. Sometimes faith doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a simple response to the moment that's right in front of you, even when you don't fully understand the story yet. And I'm excited for this one because I know this is a super short passage today. We're just reading verses 1 through 8, but there's so much meaning to it. And I think that the meaning behind this one is something that we can be reminded of every day. So before we get into everything else, just a quick little reminder, like always, I am not a theologian. I am not a Bible expert. I'm just someone who loves God, loves his word, and just wants to keep growing in it right here with you. So if I ever say something that doesn't sit right with you or doesn't sound correct, send me a message. Leave a comment on this video so everybody else can see the comment, see the correction. They can discuss it with us and see if they agree or disagree. And we can just look into it together, keep learning together, and just keep growing side by side right here. So without further ado, let's see where we currently are. Let's be reminded of what we just got out of and what we're coming into today. We just came out of one of the most dramatic moments in the gospel. Lazarus walking out of the tomb. A public miracle, witnesses everywhere, word spreading quickly. And instead of everything settling down, the opposite happened. The religious leaders didn't just disagree with Jesus anymore. They decided he needed to be stopped. So now the story shifts. From this point forward, we are no longer just watching Jesus travel and teach. We're moving into the final days before the cross, even though most of the people around him don't fully realize it yet. So Passover is approaching, which means Jerusalem is filling with travelers and tension, and crowds are gathering, leaders are watching, people are asking, where is Jesus? And whether he's actually going to show up or not. And instead of going straight into the confrontation and all this, John kind of slows us down for a minute, and he slows the story down and brings us into a house, not a crowd, not a sermon, a dinner table. Jesus is in Bethany still. He was there when he went for Lazarus and brought him out of the tomb. But it's just outside of Jerusalem. It's the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, the same Lazarus who was just raised from the dead. So picture this whole moment for a second. Outside, the city is preparing for a major festival. Leaders are planning on how to deal with Jesus. Everything is building towards something serious. But inside this house, something quiet happens. Before the crowd shout, I don't know why I said that weird, before the accusations begin, before the cross, someone simply responds to Jesus. And what looks like a small moment ends up meaning far more than anyone in the room understands at the time. So let's get into it today. We are going to start with just verses 1 through 2 today. So again, we're reading John 12, 1 through 8, but we're going to start with verses 1 through 2. And I am going to be reading, like always, from my CSB Bible. I have the She Reads Truth Bible. I really love it. I have been still debating on whether I want to fully switch over to my Hosanna Revival Bible that I got. It's just a beautiful one. I really love it, but the She Reads Truth is also really beautiful. I just love that She Reads Truth has the more study things. I don't know the right word to say that. It just has like a lot more study material that you can use in the Bible. And I just love it because even when I go to church, I take a ton of notes and highlight like crazy. So, yeah, I'm not fully set on switching over yet, but besides the point, I read from my CSB Bible. She reads truth. My version might sound a little bit different than yours. And if so, that's totally okay. It's still going to have the same meaning behind it. So don't worry about that. But let's go ahead and start. So verses 1-2, it says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, the one Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha was serving them, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. So John tells us that this happened 6 days before Passover. So this is the final week of Jesus's life before the cross. Even though the people in the room don't fully understand this yet, nobody really knows that this is going to happen. They're having dinner, and it sounds simple, but notice who is there. Martha is serving, which fits her personality from the last chapter. Lazarus is at the table, the same man who was just dead days earlier, and Jesus is sitting with them. This is a normal meal in an extremely abnormal moment. The miracle is sitting at the table, eating dinner. And sometimes scripture slows us down like this on purpose because there's a lot more meaning that we need to uncover first. But before the crowds, before the shouting, before everything becomes public, there is a quiet space where gratitude has room to exist. So let's move into our first reflection question. And that question is, where in your life have you moved past something meaningful without slowing down enough to notice it? And if you're new to these episodes, all the reflection questions are going to be in the show notes. I don't think in the earlier episodes I started doing that, but they are up on the Instagram page. And if they're not, please message me or comment, and I will be more than willing to put them in there. But I put them in the show notes, and then you can also find them over on the Even If Project, the Instagram page. There's a link in the bio where I update the reflection questions every week. So don't worry about having to write them all down. But again, that question was, where in your life have you moved past something meaningful without slowing down enough to notice it? Now, sometimes life changes and we just adjust faster than we process. A hard season has ended, a prayer gets answered, a relationship heals, peace quietly returns. And instead of noticing it, of being in this moment of just this gratitude and healing and this amazing time, we move straight into the next responsibility. That this dinner matters because Lazarus isn't just alive. And they didn't rush past that. They sat together. They let gratitude have its time. We don't always need bigger moments. Sometimes we just need slower ones. You don't have to force a feeling here. You just gently have to ask yourself, what in my life have I normalized that once felt like a rescue? Gratitude often begins simply by noticing. So let's move on to the next one. We're just going to read the next verse. It's going to be verse 3. And that says, then Mary took a pound of perfume, pure and expensive nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped his feet with her hair. So the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So Mary takes, I don't know why I'm laughing. I just think just thinking about this, like in today's world, like if you saw somebody wiping somebody's feet with their hair and putting perfume on them, I feel like just the scene itself is just mind-blowing to me. But of course, I'm just in today's world. I'm not looking back at how it was then. So I'm sorry for laughing. But Mary takes a jar of perfume, and this was not small by any means. John tells us it was pure nard, very expensive. If you don't know what nard is, which I didn't before I read this, it's very rare. It's fragrant essential oil. And this is derived from the roots of a flowering plant in the Himalayas. So it's still used today. It's still around. And if it's true nard, in today's world, a small bottle, like a 15 milliliter bottle, would cost between $60 to well over $100. But it was just because it was so rare and so labor intensive to harvest it. But in biblical times, it was worth about a year's wages. So it was very expensive. This could have been savings. It could have been security. It could have been stability that she bought this with. And she pours it onto Jesus's feet. Then she wipes his feet with her hair. In that culture, this would have been deeply personal. This isn't a polite gesture. This is vulnerability. She isn't worried about appearances in this moment. Mary may not be able to explain what's coming, but she senses something important about who Jesus is. And the house starts to fill with a fragrance, right? That's what he said at the last part of this verse, which matters here because it shows us that everyone in the room experiences it. It's not just an experience between her and Jesus. Love like this doesn't stay private. It changes the atmosphere. So let's move into our second reflection question. And that says, where do you find yourself holding back care, generosity, or obedience because it feels too costly or too visible? So Mary's actions would have been noticeable to everyone in the room. It wasn't some private thing that happened. That's part of why it feels uncomfortable to us too. Probably because why I laughed a little bit thinking about this image of what just happened here. But sometimes we don't struggle with caring. We struggle with being seen caring. We worry about doing too much. We worry about looking too emotional or appearing naive or being misunderstood. So we measure everything carefully. But Mary isn't measuring efficiency. She's responding personally here. This doesn't mean you need a dramatic action. It doesn't mean you have to take perfume and put it on somebody's feet or wipe their feet with your hair. But it might look like reaching out to someone you've been thinking about lately, or saying something kind that you usually keep to yourself, or taking a small step you just keep postponing. The point isn't performance, but it's not ignoring hesitation either. It's simply just asking, am I waiting for perfect comfort before I respond? So let's go ahead and move on to our next section. We're going to be reading verses 4-6. And that says, then one of his disciples, Judas, I can never say his last name, Iscariot, I wonder how you say it. I'm going to actually look it up right now because now I need to know. Let's see, Iscariot. Let's see. Iscariot. Okay, that is not anything like I was going to say. So let's start that over. Then one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was about to betray him, said, why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of the money bag and was still part of what was put in it. So this is where it starts getting interesting. After Mary pours out the perfume, Judas speaks up. And at first, what he says actually sounds reasonable. He asks why the perfume wasn't sold and the money given to the poor. He's trying to look out for other people for a second, because that's what they think. But if you were standing in the room, you might just nod along like, oh yeah, that's a great point. That's a great question he has. That's a great way to use that money. It sounds responsible. It sounds practical. It sounds even compassionate. But John pauses the story for a second and lets us see something that the rest of the room couldn't see. He tells us that Judas was the one who kept the money for the group, and he had been taking some for himself. So this moment isn't really caring about helping the poor. It's about a heart that is already attached to something else. Jesus and his disciples shared a common money fund. People supported them as they traveled, as they ate and cared for others, and Judas was trusted to manage it. Outwardly, he looked dependable and close with Jesus. And that's important to notice. Judas didn't begin as an obvious enemy. He began as a trusted follower. There hasn't been a betrayal yet. They don't know this yet. No dramatic turning point here. Just a private, small decision that no one else saw. And something else worth noticing here too is that, and I've said this a million times with other things, but Jesus knows what's in his heart. Jesus knows what's in Judas' heart. John tells us, but the room doesn't know it yet. And Jesus doesn't expose him in front of everyone. He doesn't embarrass him, and he doesn't remove him from the table either. Judas is still sitting there, still included, still treated as a disciple. That doesn't mean what Judas is doing is okay by any means here, but it does show us something about Jesus. Even knowing where this will lead, Jesus still shares a meal with him. So this moment isn't only revealing Judas' heart, it's revealing Jesus' patience. Now notice the contrast in this whole room. When Mary pours out something extremely valuable onto Jesus, everyone else sees devotion. Judas sees loss. The money he could have controlled is now gone. The money he could have taken for himself is gone. And he frames his objection as concern for others. But John lets us understand what's underneath it. His truth is already leaning towards money and control more than towards Jesus. This creates a quiet contrast in the same room. Mary releases something valuable towards Jesus, while Judas resents losing something valuable for himself. And outwardly, they're both still near him, both sitting at the table, both part of this group. But the difference isn't physical distance. It's what each one trusts more. So for our third reflection question, have you ever felt misunderstood while trying to do something you sincerely believed was right? So it can be unsettling when intentions are questioned, right? Sometimes faithfulness doesn't make sense to everyone watching. Mary's action looks excessive to Judas, but what he calls waste, Jesus calls love. This part of the story isn't here so we compare ourselves to Judas to feel better. It's here because it shows something very human. A person can be close to Jesus externally and still be holding tightly onto something internally. For Judas, it was money and control. For us, it can look different. It can look like security or approval or reputation, comfort, or the need to stay in charge of outcomes. I know I constantly need to stay in charge and I need to let go of that. But the issue isn't that Judas asked a question. The issue is what his heart was already relying on. And this is why Mary's response stands out so clearly in this. She gives something up because she trusts Jesus. He struggles because he trusts something else more. This moment doesn't pressure us, it's inviting honesty, because the real turning point in the story isn't the betrayal later. It's the direction of the heart here. So let's go ahead and finish up. We're going to read verses 7 through 8. And that says, Jesus answered, "Leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." So this part is one of my favorites, and it sounds very simple, but there's so much to it. And this is one that I constantly try to remember every single day. After Judas speaks, Jesus steps in. He says, "Leave her alone." He doesn't stay quiet. He doesn't let her sit in embarrassment. He protects her. Then he explains something the room doesn't yet understand, that her acts connect to his burial. He says here exactly, she kept it for the day of my burial. So Mary probably doesn't fully know what she is doing yet. She isn't performing a ritual. She isn't predicting the cross. She is responding to who she knows Jesus to be. But Jesus understands the timing perfectly. He knows his death is close. He knows this is the final week before the cross. So it looks like spontaneous to everyone else is actually meaningful. Her love meets a moment she doesn't even realize she is standing inside of. Then he says a line that can sound confusing at first. He says, for you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Jesus is not dismissing the poor here. The Bible repeatedly calls people to care for those in need. Instead, he is pointing to something specific. This moment is unique. Right now, he is physically present with them, and that will not last much longer. Mary is honoring him while she still can. She isn't waiting for a better time, a clearer explanation, or a full understanding. She responds while he is sitting at the table. So for our last question, where might you be waiting for perfect clarity before taking a step you already feel invited to take? Where might you be waiting for perfect clarity before taking a step you already feel invited to take? We often feel certainty before movement. We want to know how everything is going to turn out before we even act. We want assurance before obedience. We want understanding before trust. But Mary didn't have full explanation. Jesus did. And sometimes that's where we find ourselves too. You may already sense a small step, a conversation you've been avoiding, offering forgiveness, being honest about something, resting instead of pushing harder, or letting go of control that you've been carrying. Hesitation isn't failure, it's human. This passage isn't pressuring you to rush or force something. It's gently asking, do I need more information or do I need trust? Sometimes clarity shows up after the step, not before it. And there's also something very quiet happening here that John wants us to notice. Mary doesn't know she's standing in the final days before the cross. She isn't trying to play a bigger role in this bigger plan. She's simply responding to Jesus in front of her. But her small act becomes part of a much larger story. What looks like one personal moment in the house in Bethany becomes one of the last expressions of love Jesus receives before his death. And most of our lives work that way too, right? We usually don't recognize the important moments while we're inside of them. A conversation we didn't have, a kindness we almost withheld, a decision to forgive, choosing patience instead of reaction. At the time, they feel small. Later, we sometimes realize they mattered more than we even knew. I mean, sometimes we don't even see that part of it, right? Sometimes you do something simple for someone. You check in, or you listen, or you respond kindly, and then you just move on with your day. You don't see what it meant to them. You don't see what they were carrying. You don't see how that moment stayed with them. But that doesn't mean it wasn't significant to that person or to whoever it was towards. That's why I'm so for always checking in on the ones that are struggling. Sometimes people around you or around us are carrying so much more than we realize. And we don't know what kind of day someone has had before they've cut you off in traffic, or when their child won't stop crying at a restaurant, or when somebody seems short or distant in a text or a call or in person. We're all moving through things that we can't immediately see. We also have too many veterans and first responders and loved ones taking their own lives every single day. The weight someone holds quietly can become so overwhelming. We can't control outcomes, and we aren't responsible for fixing every situation, but we can choose presence here. A simple act that might not really feel like a big deal to you at all could be the very thing that saves them. A kind response, a message, a simple, hey, I was thinking about you. Any small act that leans towards grace and care. To you, it may feel small. To someone else, it may be the moment of relief that they needed in a very heavy day. Mary didn't know what her act meant in the full story either. She just responded to Jesus in front of her. And a lot of faith looks like that, not knowing the outcome, not seeing the whole picture, just choosing love in the moment you've been given. This passage isn't saying every action controls the future. It's just reminding us that ordinary faithfulness still has meaning, even when we can't see where it's leading us. Mary wasn't trying to shape history. She was simply present with Jesus. She possibly could have been the last one, or was the last one, to give love to Jesus before this crucifixion happened. But sometimes the most meaningful response isn't understanding everything. It's responding to what you know right now. This moment in John 12 is quiet, but I think it says so much. There's no miracle here. There's no debate. There's no crowd. It's just a table, a group of people, and one person who chooses to respond to Jesus while she still can. Mary doesn't have full understanding. She doesn't know what the next week will bring. She doesn't know the cross is days away. She simply recognizes who Jesus is to her, and she responds with what she has. Others in the room analyze it. One criticizes it. Some probably just watch. But Jesus receives it. And that matters, because this passage shows us that faith isn't always about having the right words or the right timing or the perfect certainty. Sometimes it looks like gratitude. Sometimes it looks like trust before explanation. Sometimes it looks like offering something small that feels personal or sincere. Mary doesn't wait until she understands everything about Jesus. She responds to the light she has right now. And Jesus doesn't measure her act by efficiency or practicality. He measures it by love. As the story moves towards the cross, John lets us see one last personal moment, not power, not spectacle, but relationship. Before the shouting crowds, before the accusations, before the suffering, the tension, someone simply honors him. And maybe that's the invitation here for us all. Not to figure everything out first, not to wait until faith feels certain, not to hold off until you have all the answers, but to notice Jesus in front of you and respond honestly to what you already know. If today's episode helped you slow down and notice this moment a little differently, or just reminded you that responding to Jesus doesn't require perfect timing or understanding, would you just consider sharing it with someone who might need that too? And if there's anybody that you think that you could reach out to or send a message to, or just as simple as, hey, or how are you doing, or anything, do it. You never know what that might bring, what that might save, what that might do to somebody's heavy day. If you're new here, welcome. You are already part of this community. You can find this week's verses, reflection questions, and everything else over on Instagram at the Even If Project. Again, there's a link in the bio if it's not in the actual time or scroll or feed, whatever it's called. But there's a link in there that I post all the updated reflection questions. It should also be in the show notes if you want those. And if it's not, like I said, just message me, leave a comment, and I will get them to you ASAP. But Instagram, that's where we can keep this conversation going throughout the week. And next time, we're going to be staying in John 12. I think it's going to be verses 9 through 19, because I'm pretty sure it's just these bigger, these sections. But don't quote me on that. I will go ahead and figure that out for the next episode. But we'll watch what happens as the crowd begins to gather and expectations start rising around Jesus. So bring your coffee or your water, your Bible, and an open heart, and I'll meet you right back here. I love you all.